Now a 2-decade veteran in this series, you guys are all well aware of the name Kurt Busch. Just looking at his resume, he's accomplished so much. I mean, you have his dominance during the 2010 show at 600, taking Furniture Row to a championship competitive team, and his victory 3 years ago in the Daytona 500. Yet his very best years in this sport are often non-existent, or they're not talked about amongst NASCAR fans. During the early 2000s, Kurt Busch had that stretch of energy that would put himself over the top of the competition. This is, without a doubt, the prime of Kurt Busch and the glory years driving for the Cat in the Hat. So going back to the early 2000s, you had Kurt Busch, a Tucson graduate with a pharmacy degree. But along with his combined successes in the school books, he longed to bolster a healthy career behind the wheel. And you just look at his time in the Truck Series, his time in the blue and pink Excite colors completely charged the hype around the young 20-year-old. Around this time, being labeled the next big superstar or the next Jeff Gordon was a hell of a drug to be prescribed to. If you don't believe me, just look at Casey Atwood and Andy Houston and the long-term side effects to their careers. And through his early results in Cup, it looked like Kurt Busch was going down this path as well. His rookie stripes 2001 was a complete disaster. A season full of crashes, mechanical failures, and a DNQ during fall Atlanta. Now, the main culprit to this was honestly a lack of direction with this 97 team. This was something pretty evident the minute the unsponsored Team Ford Racing Taurus was unloaded. Roush promoted Busch's Truck Series crew chief Matt Chambers up to the 97 team, only to be released 6 races into the season. Ben Leslie would be promoted atop the box after only 10 races as a top-level NASCAR crew chief. And as you guys know from this channel, constantly having a crew chief carousel, that definitely works for an inexperienced driver. Now, the new combination started strong out of the gate, but it wore down faster than Larry Mack cheese grating the hell out of a tire. This pairing was so bad that Kurt Busch only scored 1 top 20 finish in the final 15 races. Luckily, an antidote would be prescribed to salvage Kurt Busch's career. The engineering genius known as Jimmy Fennig would crew chief for the 97 team. So moving past a disappointing 2001 had the record that Kurt Busch needed going forward. A true mastermind that could get the most out of his cars and obviously drivers on the racetrack. Little did we know, this was the long-lost key that opened up Kurt Busch's prime window of opportunity. Jimmy Fennig started utilizing the elder Busch's potential, leading laps and earning 4 top 20 finishes in 5 races. And I know what you're thinking, this is a Roush team, they should be doing a lot better, and after all, they were competing for championships at this time. But I mean, considering that they didn't even have a primary sponsor this time the previous year, this was a great start. Yet, Kurt Busch would need to become a gladiator at the last great Coliseum. Between the Lady and the Tiger, the elder Busch had seen the fierce eye of Bristol way too much, tearing up his Ford Taurus the prior 2 starts. From there, it was the 2001 spring race where Kurt Busch truly learned the significance of performing at Bristol. For one, there was no way he could exit the speedway as the pedestrian tunnel wasn't a thing. So as a driver, of course, when you're stuck in the infield for another 2 hours not racing, you're bound to learn the ins and outs of how to hug that low groove and truly learn how to race this place. And then obviously having a cooler head like Jimmy Fennig definitely works to help patient a young driver like Kurt Busch. Thus, on the horizon was the 2002 running of the Food City 500. The big money race. After all, he had $1 million scattered all over his Sharpie Ford Taurus. Rolling off from the 27th position, Kurt Busch would have the race of his NASCAR Cup career. He methodically worked his way to the front with one big red bullseye left to hit. The target dodge of Mr. Excitement Jimmy Spencer. Even with the rise of Jeff Gordon, this was mostly still an old guy's sport, with the kids still largely in check. But taking his skills gathered from the Bristol infield, Kurt Busch would rattle the old guard and take the lead. And 56 laps later, the Las Vegas native cashed in his chips to earn his first ever NASCAR Cup victory. With the victory on that Bristol afternoon, he joined elite company with Rusty Wallace and Dale Earnhardt as first-time winners in Thunder Valley. In terms of his 2002, Kurt Busch would end the season by winning 3 of the final 5 races. That was the icing on the cake for an insane rally during the final 11 races of the season. Jimmy Fennig and the 97 team climbed all the way up to finish 3rd in the NASCAR Cup Series point standings. With how crazy the 2002 championship was, if you get rid of his 3 consecutive finishes outside the top 35 garnered during the summer, Kurt Busch likely ends his sophomore season by hoisting the Winston Cup trophy. It certainly would have been the most remarkable 180 in performance in NASCAR history, without a doubt. In the final year of the good old Winston Cup, Kurt Busch is remembered for 2 things. One was his door-to-door battle with Ricky Craven. The second was his continued on-track saga with Jimmy Spencer. The old versus new generation clashed once again at Michigan, with the silver and red Rubbermaid Ford trading paint with Spencer's light blue Dodge. This rivalry got so heated, in fact, it led to a post-race altercation in which Jimmy Spencer himself punched Kurt Busch. Now, even with Jimmy Spencer's suspension, some of the tedious turmoil extended to the night race at Bristol. Nonetheless, Kurt Busch would shut down the haters during the 2003 running of the Midsummer Spectacle. He would highlight the way for the final 121 circuits of the race en route to sweeping the hills of Tennessee. Now, as for 2003 itself, it was undoubtedly a success on the win sheet. He had wins at Michigan and Auto Club, which gave him 8 victories in his first 3 seasons. But the one thing that prevented him from being a surefire championship contender, however, was inconsistencies. Without a doubt, the fingers pointed to the Roush engine department for these issues. In fact, 5 of his 8 DNFs on the season were from mechanical issues. Because of that, his average finish plummeted year to year, and so did his top 10s. Without a doubt, that was something that needed to be worked out prior to the 2004 NASCAR season. But once again, you had Jimmy Fennig on the box, you had the talent of Kurt Busch, and the Roush cars were still fast. After all, Matt Kenseth won the championship. All they needed to do was get the consistency right, like at the end of 2002, and they would be competing for championships galore. So to start out 2004, in complete shocker, Kurt Busch won the Food City 500. This would be his 3rd straight and his 4th Bristol victory in the past 5 races. Just thinking about it, it's completely insane for a young driver to be good at a short track that early. But to win 4 Bristol races in your mid-20s, that's an absolute statement as a driver. Going into the postseason, Kurt Busch was seeded 7th, 30 points removed from the lead. Odds are nobody saw 2004 as his year. I mean, you gotta look at Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson, and Dale Earnhardt Jr. They completely dominated the season. Chances are some 25-year-old kid wasn't about to steal the trophy from more experienced drivers. However, what you had to keep in mind in this situation was the inaugural playoff race played into the wheelhouse of the 97 team. It would be at the New Hampshire Motor Speedway. The Irwin Tools Ford Taurus put on a clinic en route to win number 2 on the year. And rolling off from the 7th position, the Roush Racing Fords brought that added horsepower to the 1-mile oval. And from that first race, Kurt Busch made a statement, leading 155 laps on the day to claim the victory, with defending champ Matt Kenseth not too far behind. In the blink of an eye, the elder Busch brother left Lobster Country tied for the season points lead. From there, Kurt Busch would put together a consistent stretch in the first chase for the Cup. The only race of disaster for this 97 team was a 42nd place finish at Atlanta. And even with that poor finish, he still left the Hamptons 59 points ahead of Jimmy Johnson. Without a doubt, Jimmy Fennig and crew were poised to win a championship. But still, you had an all-important race in Miami looming large in order to capture and clinch the championship. As the green flag waved on the final race of the season, Kurt Busch and the 97 team were faced with adversity throughout the 400-lap race. On lap 91, the right front tire came loose from the golden Sharpie Ford Taurus. Then some miscommunication on Jimmy Fennig's end paved way for a long stop on pit road. By taking 4 tires instead of 2, the 97 was mired all the way back in the 25th position. Without a question, they were choking up their big moment in front of a network audience on NBC. But this is where Jimmy Fennig would rally the troops and Kurt Busch would keep his eye on the prize. The elder Busch methodically worked his way back up through the field and found himself in the top 5 late in the race. And at that point, all he needed to do was keep Jimmy Johnson and Jeff Gordon in sight, and Kurt Busch would be forever sharpied into the history books as a NASCAR Cup champion.
Checkered flag is up. Greg Biffle wins the Ford 400 at the Homestead Miami Speedway. Jimmy Johnson and Jeff Gordon finish second and third. It's not going to be enough. Kurt Busch is the 2004 NASCAR Nextel Cup Series champion.
And there it was. In just year 4 of his NASCAR Cup career, Kurt Busch would have his name alongside Richard Petty, Dale Earnhardt, and Cale Yarborough as champions to hoist the trophy. But what really makes this championship truly special compared to others is who he had to beat in order to hoist the title. Jeff Gordon, winner of 4 of the last 9 championships and the winningest active driver on the tour. Dale Earnhardt Jr., the son of Dale Earnhardt and NASCAR's most popular driver by a long shot. Mark Martin, a grizzled veteran and fan favorite, still vying for his taste of the Cup. And then you had Jimmy Johnson, the winningest driver of the 2004 season. And you have to think, through all this, Hendrick Motorsports had a strong motivation to claim that championship in the wake of the organization's tragic plane crash. Through all of these household names and storylines, it was the young, and still relatively unknown, Kurt Busch doing burnouts in the Big Apple. With Roush Fenway Racing still competitive, Kurt Busch would definitely be in the mix to defend his crown for 2005. He had some truly dominating performances spanning the Poconos to the deserts of Phoenix. The 97 team had the speed, which led to a career-high 958 laps led on the tour. And then to cap off the regular season, he had a royal victory at the Richmond Fairgrounds. Once again, it was time for Jimmy Fennig and crew to do what they do best and win the second championship in 2 years.
Slide there on the 10 car.
And the 97 car.
Busch in the wall, the defending series champion.
Unfortunately, that championship defense would go sour in just the first 3 laps of the 10-race fight. Scott Riggs showcased how much of a bust he was by drifting up the track and taking out Kurt Busch. With heavy damage to the nose, that pretty much hindered any chance of Kurt Busch getting a good finish in the first race. Entering the Dover Downs, Kurt Busch knew he pretty much needed a top 5 to dig himself out of the hole that first race was. And once again, Jimmy Fennig brought a fast hot rod, and they were up front dominating the day, leading a good amount of laps. 192 to be exact. But then in the form of teammate Matt Kenseth blowing a tire, things would quickly downward spiral at an instant.
And Kurt Busch, who had already pitted, scored 17th, 1 lap down. So Kurt Busch, another championship contender, finished 35th a week ago on to pit road, unscheduled stop under green.
And just like that, Kurt Busch ended up with a 23rd place finish and was all but eliminated from NASCAR title contention. As the 2005 season came to a conclusion, this would also be the end of the road for his tenure at Roush Racing. Intrigued by a vacated Blue Deuce, Kurt Busch would take his talents to Roger Penske. Jack Roush, envisioning Jamie McMurray as a championship caliber driver, let the elder Busch depart the 97 team he'd achieved so much success in only his first 5 seasons. Even as Kurt Busch figured this was a wise decision, ultimately this would end his prime window. 2006 would see him struggle in the Blue Deuce, albeit he won Bristol again, he wouldn't even make the playoffs the next season. And really, when you look at the numbers of Kurt Busch, he hasn't been the same since he drove the 97 car. The highest amount of wins he's gotten in one season since is only 2, and that happened on 5 separate occasions. He also hasn't led more than 900 laps in a season, with the closest times coming in 2007 and 2010. And then when you look at his statistics per car number, you can just tell it just hasn't been the same since that prime era. Ultimately, when I think back on this era, not only do I reflect on the things that they achieved in such a short amount of time, but I think of what could have been. Roush Racing, for one, really didn't start tapering off until the early 2010s. I certainly believe had he remained at Roush for another 5 to 7 years, he would have won another championship and would have gotten a lot more victories. After all, during the early 2000s, the 97 team was almost perfect. But looking back, the era of the 97 was remarkably special, and unless Kurt Busch suddenly wins a lot of races at Ganassi, this will be the peak of Kurt Busch in the NASCAR Cup Series. So anyways, this is NRF signing out, and just remember, life's a beach and then you drive.